They called it the Invincible Fortress. German tank crews who climbed into the Tiger heavy tank in the winter of 1943 believed they were entering the most powerful armored vehicle ever built. The Tiger's 88mm gun could destroy any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. Its frontal armor, 100mm thick and perfectly vertical on early models, could shrug off virtually every anti-tank weapon the Allies possessed. For nearly 2 years, this belief held true. Tiger crews drove into battle with confidence bordering on arrogance, knowing their machines outclassed everything they faced. American Sherman crews learned to fear the distinctive sound of the Tiger's Maybach engine, the heavy clank of its overlapping road wheels, the sharp crack of its main gun that announced death from distances where return fire was impossible. British tankers developed unofficial doctrines, calling for 5 Shermans to engage a single Tiger, accepting that 3 would be destroyed in the process if the remaining 2 could maneuver for flank shots. But on the morning of February 26, 1945, near the German town of Elsdorf, a Tiger crew experienced something they had been told was impossible. An American tank they had never seen before, larger and heavier than a Sherman, fired a single round from approximately 900 yards. The projectile struck the Tiger's frontal armor with tremendous force and kept going. It penetrated completely, tearing through the fighting compartment and killing 2 crew members instantly. The remaining crew abandoned their tank in shock, unable to process what had just happened. Their fortress was not invincible after all. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The question that would haunt German tank crews for the final months of the war was simple and terrible. If American tanks could now penetrate Tiger armor at combat ranges, what did that mean for every tactical assumption, every defensive plan, every psychological advantage they had relied upon since 1943? The answer would reshape the final armored battles of World War II and reveal the true cost of Germany's strategic miscalculations. To understand the psychological impact of this moment, you must first understand what the Tiger represented to those who fought in it and against it. The tank was not merely a weapon. It was a symbol of German technological superiority, a physical manifestation of the belief that engineering excellence could compensate for numerical inferiority. When Adolf Hitler first saw the Tiger prototype in April 1942, he immediately recognized its propaganda value as much as its military utility. The Tiger program began in 1937, when the German Army Weapons Agency issued specifications for a breakthrough tank capable of engaging fortifications and enemy armor at extended ranges. The initial requirements called for a vehicle mounting the new 88mm anti-aircraft gun adapted for anti-tank use, with armor sufficient to resist the heaviest Allied tank guns then in service. 2 companies received contracts. Henschel and Sohn developed what would become the Tiger, while Porsche created an alternative design that would ultimately be rejected. Engineer Erwin Aders at Henschel led the design team that created the Tiger's hull and suspension system. The challenge was immense. The 88mm gun and its ammunition were heavy. The armor thickness required for adequate protection added tremendous weight. The suspension had to support approximately 56 tons, nearly twice the weight of contemporary medium tanks. Aders chose an overlapping road wheel design with torsion bar suspension, providing good cross-country mobility despite the tank's mass. The armor layout reflected German defensive philosophy. The front hull armor was 100mm thick, positioned vertically rather than sloped. German engineers calculated that the thickness alone provided adequate protection, and vertical armor simplified manufacturing compared to the complex welding required for sloped designs. The sides were 80mm thick, the rear 80mm, and the turret front varied between 100 and 120mm, depending on the specific area. The 88mm KWK-36 gun was the heart of the design. This weapon had proven itself in combat as an anti-aircraft gun, and was devastating against Allied armor when used in the anti-tank role at places like Halfaya Pass in North Africa. The tank-mounted version could fire armor-piercing rounds at a muzzle velocity of approximately 2,600 feet per second, giving it extraordinary penetrating power at extended ranges. By January 1943, when the first Tigers entered combat on the Eastern Front near Leningrad, German tankers quickly learned their machine's capabilities and limitations. The tank was slow, achieving only 23 miles per hour on roads and considerably less cross-country. It was mechanically complex, requiring extensive maintenance that strained German logistics. The overlapping road wheels, while providing excellent ride quality, packed with mud and froze solid in winter conditions, sometimes immobilizing the tank completely. But when positioned correctly, when used in the defensive role it excelled at, the Tiger was devastating. Soviet tankers attacking German positions found their 34 medium tanks, the backbone of Soviet armored forces, completely outmatched. The 34 mounted a 76mm gun that could not penetrate Tiger frontal armor at any practical combat range. Soviet crews had to maneuver for flank shots, exposing themselves to the Tiger's deadly main gun in the process. In North Africa, British forces encountered Tigers for the first time in late 1942, near Tabourba in Tunisia. The results were catastrophic for Allied armour. British tanks mounting 2-pounder and 6-pounder guns found their rounds bouncing off Tiger armour even at close range. The Tiger's 88mm gun destroyed British tanks from distances where the British couldn't effectively return fire. After-action reports spoke of Tiger tanks sitting in hull-down positions, methodically destroying British armour, advancing across open ground. American forces first faced Tigers in Tunisia as well. Sherman tanks with their 75mm guns could penetrate Tiger side armour at close range, but had virtually no chance against frontal armour. American tank crews learned quickly that engaging a Tiger from the front was suicide. The unofficial doctrine became avoid, flank, or call for air support. Some American units developed tactics where Shermans would deliberately draw Tiger fire, sacrificing themselves so other Shermans could maneuver for side shots. The psychological impact on Allied tank crews was profound. Men who climbed into Shermans or Cromwells or 34s knew they were entering vehicles that were fundamentally inferior to the Tiger in direct combat. This knowledge bred fear and caution. It affected tactical decisions. It influenced how units approached terrain and planned attacks. Allied commanders had to commit multiple tanks to engage single Tigers, accepting losses as inevitable. German propaganda exploited Tiger invincibility ruthlessly. Newsreels showed Tigers crushing enemy positions. Magazine articles featured interviews with Tiger crews describing their victories. The tank appeared in posters and films as the symbol of German armoured might. This propaganda served multiple purposes. It boosted morale among German forces and civilians. It intimidated enemy populations. And critically, it reinforced to Tiger crews themselves that they were elite warriors operating superior equipment. The men selected to crew Tigers were among the best Germany had. They received extensive training at specialized schools. They learned not just how to operate the tank, but how to maintain its complex systems, how to employ it tactically, how to maximize its strengths while minimizing exposure to its weaknesses. A Tiger crew consisted of 5 men, each with specific responsibilities that required considerable skill. The commander, typically a sergeant or lieutenant, occupied the turret's right side. He directed the tank's movement and fire, maintained situational awareness through periscopes and by standing in the open cupola hatch when tactical conditions permitted, and coordinated with other tanks and infantry through radio communication. Every Tiger had a radio, unlike the Japanese tanks that would later prove so vulnerable in the Pacific. The commander's role required tactical judgment, technical knowledge, and the ability to make split-second decisions under extreme stress. The gunner sat to the commander's left in the turret, operating the 88mm gun through a telescopic sight with variable magnification. He traversed the turret using hydraulic power when the engine was running, or a manual hand crank if hydraulic pressure was lost. Engaging targets at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards required precise calculation of distance, target movement, and ballistic drop. German optics were excellent, giving gunners clear views of distant targets, but actually hitting those targets demanded extensive training and practice. The loader stood behind the gun, responsible for maintaining the Tiger's rate of fire. 88mm rounds were heavy and awkward to handle in the confined turret space. A skilled loader could maintain approximately 6 to 8 rounds per minute, though this rate decreased as fatigue set in during extended combat. The loader also managed ammunition storage, ensuring the right type of round, armor-piercing or high explosive, was immediately available. The driver sat in the front left of the hull, controlling the Tiger's movement through a complex system of steering levers, gear shifts, and pedals. Driving a 56-ton tank required significant physical strength and considerable skill. The Tiger's transmission was delicate relative to the vehicle's weight, and rough handling could cause mechanical failures that would immobilize the tank far from repair facilities. Good drivers learned their tank's characteristics, understanding how it handled in different terrain and weather conditions. The radio operator and hull machine gunner occupied the front right position, operating a 7.92mm machine gun mounted in a ball mount and managing radio communications under the commander's direction. He monitored radio frequencies, relayed messages, and provided additional firepower against infantry and soft targets. These 5 men functioned as a unit, each dependent on the others. In combat, they operated in an environment of tremendous noise, heat, and vibration. The Maybach engine produced 700 horsepower, creating sound levels that made communication difficult even with intercom systems. Firing the 88mm gun created concussive force that was physically painful in the enclosed space. The smell of cordite, oil, sweat, and sometimes blood filled the fighting compartment during extended engagements. Yet for all their training and equipment superiority, Tiger crews operated under constraints that would ultimately prove fatal. German industrial capacity could not produce Tigers in meaningful numbers. From 1942 through August 1944, Germany manufactured approximately 1,387 Tiger I tanks. This sounds impressive until compared to Allied production. The United States alone built over 49,000 Sherman tanks during the war. The Soviet Union produced approximately 58,034 tanks in various models. The ratio was staggering. For every Tiger Germany fielded, the Allies deployed dozens of medium tanks. German commanders understood this disparity and attempted to compensate through tactical employment, using Tigers as breakthrough weapons or defensive anchors rather than for general combat. Heavy tank battalions operated independently, attached temporarily to divisions that needed their firepower. This meant Tigers were constantly moving between sectors, enduring long road marches that stressed their complex mechanical systems. Maintenance was a constant struggle. The Tiger's Maybach HL 230p 45 engine was powerful but temperamental. It required regular maintenance that was difficult to perform in field conditions. The overlapping road wheel suspension, while providing excellent mobility, was a maintenance nightmare. Changing an inner road wheel required removing multiple outer wheels, a process that could take hours even under ideal conditions. In combat zones under fire, it was nearly impossible. Fuel consumption was enormous. The Tiger needed approximately 170 gallons to fill its internal tanks, giving it a road range of about 75 to 100 miles depending on terrain. In comparison, a Sherman carried approximately 150 gallons and achieved a road range of approximately 120 miles, despite being a lighter vehicle. For Germany, with its fuel supplies constantly threatened by Allied bombing of synthetic fuel plants and loss of Romanian oil fields, the Tiger's thirst for gasoline was a serious strategic liability. Yet, despite these constraints, the Tiger's combat effectiveness when properly employed was undeniable. In Normandy, during June and July 1944, a single Tiger commanded by SS Oberscharführer Michael Wittmann achieved legendary status by destroying multiple Allied tanks in a single engagement near Villers-Bocage on June 13th. Wittmann's Tiger, along with several others from the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion, ambushed a British column, destroying approximately 14 tanks, 15 personnel carriers, and 2 anti-tank guns in approximately 15 minutes. This engagement, widely publicized by German propaganda, reinforced the myth of Tiger invincibility. What the propaganda didn't emphasize was that Wittmann achieved this success through surprise, superior positioning, and attacking an unprepared enemy column stretched along a road. When Allied forces adapted their tactics, concentrated their firepower, and called in air support, even Wittmann's luck ran out. He died in his Tiger on August 8, 1944, when his tank was destroyed by Allied fire, possibly from a Sherman Firefly mounting a British 17-pounder gun or from concentrated fire from multiple tanks. The Firefly represented the first serious Allied counter to the Tiger. The British 17-pounder anti-tank gun, adapted for mounting in Sherman tanks, could penetrate Tiger frontal armor at ranges around 1,000 yards under favorable conditions. But Fireflies were rare, with only one per troop of 4 tanks in British armored units. The vast majority of Allied tanks still carried guns inadequate for frontal engagements with Tigers. American ordnance officers understood the problem clearly. Reports from North Africa, Italy, and Normandy consistently described Sherman inadequacy against German heavy armor. The 75mm gun simply lacked the penetrating power to deal with Tigers frontally. Even the improved 76mm gun introduced in later Sherman models, while better, was insufficient against Tiger frontal armor at typical combat ranges. In September 1943, the United States Ordnance Department approved development of a new, heavy tank mounting a 90mm gun. The project moved forward slowly, hampered by debates about whether heavy tanks were truly necessary, concerns about shipping weight limiting how many could be transported to Europe, and the massive logistical infrastructure already built around the Sherman. American armored doctrine emphasized mobility and reliability over armor protection and gun power, reflecting different strategic priorities than German defensive warfare. The new tank, designated T-26 during development and later named M-26 Pershing, represented a significant departure from previous American design philosophy. It weighed 46 tons, substantially heavier than the Sherman's 33 tons, but still lighter than the Tiger's 56 tons. The armor was dramatically improved, with frontal hull armor of 4 inches sloped at 46 degrees, providing effective protection equivalent to approximately 6 inches against anti-tank fire. The 90mm M3 gun was the Pershing's defining feature. This weapon was adapted from the 90mm anti-aircraft gun, similar in concept to how Germany had adapted its 88mm anti-aircraft gun for tank use. The 90mm fired armor-piercing rounds at a muzzle velocity of approximately 2,800 feet per second, giving it substantially better penetration than the Sherman's 75 or 76mm guns. Testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland demonstrated the 90mm's capability. At 1,000 yards, the T-33 armor-piercing capped ballistic cap round could penetrate approximately 8 inches of face-hardened armor plate at 0 degrees, meaning perpendicular impact. Against sloped armor, penetration decreased but remained formidable. Most importantly, the gun could defeat Tiger frontal armor at combat ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, finally giving American tankers a weapon that could engage German heavy tanks frontally with confidence. But development and production moved frustratingly slowly. The first 20 T-26 tanks arrived at the front only in January 1945. They were issued to the 3rd Armored Division and the 9th Armored Division, veteran units that had been fighting since Normandy. Tank crews who received Pershings were experienced men who understood exactly what they were getting. After months of fighting in Shermans, learning to fear Tigers, developing tactics based on avoiding frontal engagements, they suddenly had a tank that could fight back on more equal terms. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The crews needed training on the new vehicle. The Pershing was larger, heavier, and more complex than Sherman's. The 90mm gun required different ranging and aiming techniques. The tank's weight meant it handled differently, particularly on soft ground or damaged bridges. Maintenance procedures were unfamiliar, but the crews were motivated. They knew what they had been given and what it meant for their survival chances. The first Pershing versus Tiger engagement occurred on February 26, 1945, near the town of Elsdorf in western Germany. The 3rd Armoured Division was advancing through the Cologne Plain, pushing toward the Rhine River. German forces were conducting a fighting withdrawal, using every defensive advantage the terrain offered. Among the defenders was a Tiger from the 506th Heavy Panzer Battalion, positioned to cover a key intersection. The Tiger crew had fought through the Ardennes offensive in December, survived the Allied counterattack, and withdrawn across Germany as the front collapsed. They were experienced, skilled, and despite the deteriorating strategic situation, still confident in their tanks' superiority over anything the Americans fielded. They had engaged numerous Shermans over the preceding months, destroying several and forcing others to withdraw or maneuver for flank shots. The Tiger had taken hits that would have destroyed lighter tanks, with shells bouncing off its thick armor. On that February morning, the Tiger occupied a hull-down position with good fields of fire across open ground the Americans would need to cross. The commander watched through his optics as American tanks approached. He identified them as Shermans initially, familiar opponents. Standard procedure was to engage at maximum effective range, approximately 1,500 to 2,000 yards, destroying lead tanks and forcing the column to halt or disperse. But one of the approaching American tanks was larger than a Sherman. The commander studied it through his optics, uncertain what he was seeing. The silhouette was wrong. The turret was different. The gun was visibly larger than a Sherman 75 or 76mm weapon. He reported this to his gunner, who traversed the turret to acquire the target. The range was approximately 900 yards, well within the Tiger's effective engagement envelope. The American tank was a Pershing from Company F, 32nd Armored Regiment, 3rd Armored Division. The crew had been operating the tank for only a few weeks, still learning its characteristics. But they had spotted the Tiger, identified it correctly through their optics, and prepared to engage. The gunner centered his reticle on the Tiger's frontal armor, calculated the range using the telescopic sights ranging system, and waited for the commander's fire order. Both tanks fired nearly simultaneously. The Tiger's 88mm round struck the Pershing's frontal armor at the junction between the hull and the glacis plate. The impact was tremendous, rocking the tank and showering the interior with spall fragments knocked loose from the inner surface of the armor. But the armor held. The round did not penetrate. The crew, shaken but alive, maintained their position. The Pershing's 90mm round struck the Tiger's frontal armor slightly left of center. Unlike every previous American tank round the Tiger crew had experienced, this one did not ricochet or shatter against the armor's surface. It punched through. The T-33 armor-piercing round, traveling at 2,800 feet per second, carried sufficient kinetic energy to defeat 100 millimeters of vertical armor at 900 yards. The penetration was catastrophic. The round entered the fighting compartment with enormous energy, fragmenting as it passed through the armor plate. Shrapnel filled the interior space at supersonic velocity. The loader died instantly, struck by multiple fragments. The gunner was wounded severely, unable to continue. The commander, standing in the turret, felt the concussive force and immediately ordered the crew to abandon the vehicle. The driver and radio operator needed no encouragement. They evacuated through their hull hatches, while the commander helped extract the wounded gunner through the turret. The Tiger crew took cover in a nearby building, watching American tanks advance past their abandoned vehicle. For the commander, a veteran of 2 years of combat, the experience was psychologically shattering. His Tiger, the fortress that had protected him through countless engagements, had been penetrated frontally by an American tank. This was not supposed to be possible. Every tactical doctrine, every training scenario, every combat experience told him that Tiger frontal armor was impervious to American tank guns at any practical combat range. The realization that American tanks could now kill Tigers frontally spread rapidly through German armored units. Tank commanders shared information through official channels and informal networks. The Americans had deployed a new tank, heavier and more powerful than Sherman's, mounting a gun capable of defeating Tiger armor. This information fundamentally altered German tactical calculations. Tigers could no longer sit in prepared positions confident their frontal armor provided absolute protection. They needed to employ the same caution, the same awareness of vulnerability that had always applied to lighter tanks. For American tank crews, the Elsdorf engagement provided proof that the Pershing performed as designed. The 90mm gun could penetrate Tiger armor frontally. The Pershing's own armor could resist Tiger fire, at least sometimes, under the right conditions. This knowledge transformed American armored operations in the final months of the war. Tank crews who received Pershings gained confidence they had lacked in Sherman's. They could engage German heavy armor without relying solely on flanking maneuvers or numerical superiority. More Pershings arrived at the front through March and April 1945. Production increased as factories tooled up for mass manufacture, though the war ended before production reached anything approaching Sherman numbers. Approximately 310 Pershings were produced by war's end, with about 20 seeing combat in Europe. This was a tiny fraction of American armored strength, but those 20 tanks had psychological impact far exceeding their numbers. On March 6, 1945, another engagement demonstrated Pershing capability. Near the town of Niel, a Pershing from the 3rd Armored Division encountered a Panther medium tank at approximately 1,000 yards. The Panther, Germany's most numerous heavy tank with over 6,000 produced, mounted a 75mm gun and had well-sloped armor providing excellent protection against most Allied weapons. The Pershing fired 3 rounds. The first struck the Panther's frontal armor and penetrated. The tank exploded, ammunition detonating inside the crew compartment. German tank crews who survived. Encounters with Pershings reported their experiences to intelligence officers. The reports were remarkably consistent. American tanks that looked like oversized Shermans, but with substantially larger guns. Armor that could resist 88mm fire. Guns that could penetrate Tiger and Panther frontal armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. These reports reached higher headquarters, where staff officers attempted to develop counter-tactics, but by March 1945, Germany's strategic situation made tactical adjustments largely irrelevant. The appearance of Pershings coincided with Germany's final collapse. The Rhine crossings in March opened Germany's industrial heartland to Allied armies. Fuel shortages immobilized much of Germany's remaining armor. Spare parts became unavailable as factories were captured or destroyed. Experienced crews were irreplaceable, killed in combat, or unable to be adequately trained due to fuel shortages limiting training time. By April, German armored forces existed primarily as scattered units conducting local counterattacks or defending key positions until ammunition ran out. But the Pershing's significance extended beyond the handful of engagements it participated in during the war's final months. It represented a fundamental shift in American armored doctrine. The United States, which had resisted building heavy tanks throughout most of the war, finally acknowledged that firepower and protection mattered as much as mobility and reliability. The lessons learned from Pershing development and combat employment would inform American tank design for decades. The psychological impact on both sides revealed something profound about armored warfare and military technology. For German crews, The Tiger had represented technological superiority, a tangible advantage that compensated for numerical inferiority and deteriorating strategic position. When that advantage disappeared, when American tanks demonstrated they could penetrate Tiger armor frontally, it reinforced the hopelessness that many German soldiers felt by early 1945. The war was lost. Superior equipment would not save them. Fighting spirit could not overcome industrial might. For American crews, the Pershing validated complaints they had voiced for years. The Sherman, for all its reliability and ease of maintenance, was inadequate against German heavy armor. American tankers had been forced to fight at a disadvantage, accepting higher casualties because doctrine prioritized mobility over protection. The Pershing proved that American industry could build heavy tanks competitive with the best German armor when priorities shifted. The question haunting some veterans afterward was why it took so long, how many lives were lost because heavy tank development was delayed. The production numbers told the larger story. Germany manufactured approximately 1,387 Tiger I tanks and approximately 400.92 Tiger II tanks, for a total of approximately 1,879 heavy tanks across both models. It also produced over 6,000 Panther medium tanks, which some classifications consider heavy tanks due to their weight and armor. Combined, Germany fielded perhaps 8,000 heavy and super heavy tanks during World War II. The United States produced approximately 310 Pershings by war's end, a minuscule number by comparison. But American strategy never relied on heavy tanks. The 49,000 Shermans, supported by massive artillery, complete air superiority, and overwhelming logistical capacity, proved sufficient to defeat Germany. The Sherman's main advantage was not in tank versus tank combat, but in the fact that it was available everywhere, in enormous numbers, supported by ammunition, fuel, and spare parts that never ran short. Germany's heavy tanks were magnificent machines individually. The Tiger and Tiger II, the Panther, the Player, various tank destroyers mounting powerful guns, all demonstrated engineering excellence and battlefield effectiveness when properly employed. But they could not be produced in sufficient quantities. They could not be adequately supplied with fuel and ammunition. They could not be maintained in field conditions with decreasing availability of spare parts. And by 1945, they faced enemies who had finally developed weapons capable of defeating them. The final irony of the Tiger versus Pershing story is that it barely mattered to the war's outcome. By the time Pershings arrived in meaningful numbers, Germany was already defeated. The Rhine had been crossed. Allied armies were driving into Germany from both east and west. Fuel shortages immobilized most German armor. Even if every Tiger had been invulnerable, even if German tanks had maintained complete technological superiority, it would not have changed the strategic reality. Germany lacked the resources, the industrial capacity, and the manpower to continue fighting. But for the men involved, for the individual tank crews who fought the final battles, the Pershing represented something vitally important. It meant they had a weapon that gave them a chance. After years of fighting in tanks they knew were inferior, after developing tactics based on avoiding fair fights with German heavy armor, after losing friends to Tigers that killed from ranges where return fire was impossible, American tankers finally had equipment that let them fight back effectively. The German crew that abandoned their Tiger at Elsdorf after being penetrated by a Pershing experienced a moment of revelation similar to what Japanese tank crews would experience when 50 caliber machine guns penetrated their Hagos. The equipment they had trusted, the tactical advantages they had relied upon, the psychological comfort of technological superiority, all disappeared in a single engagement. They survived the war, surrendering to American forces days later, but they carried the knowledge that their fortress had proven vulnerable after all. Post-war analysis of tank combat effectiveness revealed uncomfortable truths for all sides. German heavy tanks had excellent guns and armor, but were mechanically unreliable, difficult to maintain, and produced in insufficient numbers. Soviet tanks were crude but produced in overwhelming quantities that German forces could not match. American tanks prioritized reliability and maintainability over protection and firepower, a choice that cost lives but proved strategically sound, given American logistical capabilities and numerical superiority. The Pershing represented what American industry could produce when given proper specifications and sufficient priority. It was a capable heavy tank, competitive with the best German armor, mounting a gun that could defeat heavy armor at combat ranges. Had it been developed earlier, had production begun in 1943 instead of 1945, it might have reduced American casualties in the European theatre. But it arrived too late to significantly impact the war's outcome, serving primarily as a proof of concept for post-war American tank development. The Tiger crews, who fought in the final months of the war, those who encountered Pershings and realized their armor could be penetrated frontally, understood something their commanders perhaps did not want to acknowledge. Germany had lost the industrial war years earlier. Superior engineering and tactical skill could win battles but not campaigns. Individual weapons superiority meant nothing without the industrial capacity to produce them in adequate numbers, the logistics to supply them with fuel and ammunition, and the trained crews to operate them effectively. When that Tiger commander at Elsdorf watched his abandoned tank penetrated through its frontal armor by an American 90mm round, he witnessed the end of German armor superiority. The fortress was not invincible. The Americans had caught up technologically and maintained their overwhelming numerical advantage. The outcome was inevitable. The war would be over in weeks, and every Tiger crew knew it, whether they admitted it or not. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.